Greetings, everyone. Dr. Brian Scott with you. Again, we are studying the insight to end times. Where are we in God's timetable? Are we close to the end? And the answer, I believe, is we're really close to the end. How close, we don't know, but we are getting really close. We're looking at some of the symptoms or some of the signs that point to that in 2 Timothy chapter 3, where Paul wrote the young pastor Timothy to tell him of the perilous times that were going to come in these last days. If you're just joining us for the first time or just along the road here as we've been going down through all these podcasts, last days refers to the last of the last of the last days. There's no other days behind that. Perilous times refers to exceedingly fierce, exceedingly dangerous times coming to the earth. We've been looking at the symptoms of that, or the signs of that. We're on number 14 in verse number 3. It's despisers of good. Yesterday we were talking how our court systems have become rather confused, it seems. There's been such a shift in the law over the years away from the standards that I knew when I was in law school and when I was practicing law. Today we just see so many criminals and so many contract breakers getting away with things before they're brought to justice, whereas the victim suffers from the time they're afflicted until it's just ongoing, and the victims have almost no rights. Paul prophesied that we're going to see this in these last days. It's going to be savage, it's going to be violent, it's going to be a horrible situation that we're dealing with. And there will be times when people are going to they're just going to throw their hands up and say, how can that be? How can that be? How can so-and-so who just committed that, how can that be? Well, lawyers have been trained to deal with technicalities and to deal with minor points that become major points. And there's always something happening in the system or within rulings that changes the way things go. And as a result, we get into more and more confusion. Everything gets turned upside down. We just had our highest court make a decision that a person who has committed multiple murders, for instance, who is sentenced to life in prison, and maybe that's a 25-year sentence before a parole hearing, or sometimes they add to that. And they came down in a recent decision and said, having this 25-year period is inhumane. It doesn't provide this individual his charter of freedom rights. This is confusing. We don't understand it. We've just seen so many things happen in the last few months and years here that have been absolutely confusing. Absolutely confusing. If you have been watching the news here in Canada, where I'm situated, we had a protest that occurred in the early part of the year. And the protest was against the COVID mandates and the rules and regulations that had been put into effect, especially came to a head because our government decided that our long-distance truckers could no longer cross the border unless they were all double vaccinated. The majority of them had not been because they're in a truck all the time. They're isolated. They're by themselves. Well, that not only affected our Canadian drivers, it also affected American drivers, and we all of a sudden had a huge shortage of goods and everything backing up. So they gathered to protest. The government wouldn't meet with them, wouldn't even talk with them, wouldn't sit down with them, wouldn't listen to them, wouldn't share with them. They hid in a corner, buried their heads in the sand, so to speak. So what did the government do? They brought out an emergency act that just absolutely had horrendous implications. And now it's coming to light. A, they didn't have the right to do it. B, they falsified the evidence to do it in that first place. And C, now they're backtracking. Moral confusion, no morals to begin with, but moral confusion, hopelessness, bank accounts were seized and frozen. Folks, it was a mess. It still is a mess. But this is despisers of good. The laws of the land and the regulations of land have been set up in such a fashion to protect those who are violating the law, but not protect those who are obeying the law. And we have a despisers of good. We have a lot of evil going on. These are last days. Who would have ever thought Who would have ever thought this would come to this place? I'll see you tomorrow. Got some more real good stuff for you. Thanks for joining. Amen.